Today, I write another page of Jesus' diary, my diary. Not all temptations shout. Some whisper, and those are the ones that come closer, because they were your voice. Today, the wind rose early. It touched my face like a memory, gentle, but with an edge. The sky was too blue to feel safe, the ground too steady to trust. And inside me, something shifted. This was not hunger, not thirst. This was the moment my flesh made a suggestion, a quiet one. Jump, not from despair, but from pride, not to escape, but to prove, because somewhere, buried deep beneath obedience, was the ancient ache to be seen, to be rescued, to be lifted from pain and glorified before the time. And my flesh knew it. It didn't demand a fall. It offered a miracle. Jump, and the angels will catch you. And for a breath of a moment, I wanted to, not because I doubted my Father, but because I wanted the world to stop doubting me. But love doesn't test what it trusts, and faith doesn't jump to be caught. It stands even when nothing arrives. So I stood, on the edge of the thought, on the edge of the promise, on the edge of myself, and I chose silence over spectacle, trust over thrill, surrender over proof, because obedience doesn't always look brave. Sometimes it looks like not moving at all. If you've ever stood on the edge of your own question, your own fear, your own desire to be seen, like this video, because some of the loudest battles are fought in the quietest places. The wind had changed. It wasn't wild, but it was rising. Each gust climbed the rocks like a voice trying to be heard. The desert was still empty. No footsteps, no movement. But the silence had begun to carry weight. The sun stood directly overhead, casting no shadow to hide beneath. Its heat was not a fire, but a pressure. Constant, exacting like a gaze you cannot avoid. The stones near my feet were smooth, as if worn down by years of waiting for someone to believe too much, or not enough. I had climbed higher today, not for vision, but because something in me needed to see the ground from above, to measure how far I could fall and still be caught. There were no people here, no priests, no temple guards, no crowd shouting Hosanna, but somehow it felt like the world was watching. The air was thin, each breath felt borrowed, each heartbeat a drum in the hollow of my chest. And still, a quiet tension rose in me. Not fear, but familiarity, like I had stood on this ledge before. In another story, in another man's hesitation. And inside me, a voice spoke, not from heaven, but from within. A voice I recognized. Well, I had a face. He stood there, not in front of me, but within me. Not as Satan, not yet, but as something more subtle, more familiar. He wore my face. He spoke in my voice, but his eyes burned with a hunger I no longer answered. Why wait? He asked, his tone wrapped in compassion and calculation. You could show them, just once, show them the power they doubt. He didn't threaten, he reasoned, like a brother I had outgrown, but who still knew how to press the bruises that hadn't healed. He didn't tempt me to fall. He invited me to fly, to make heaven prove its love, to make my Father move. Not from promise, but from performance. And for a moment, I felt the ache, not for the leap, but for the rescue, to be seen, to be caught, to be declared beloved from the edge of the temple, not from the riverbank of obscurity. And that was the real test, not whether I would fall, but whether I would force God to catch me. I looked into his eyes, this version of me shaped by ego and ache, and I whispered, I don't need to fall to know I'm held. And just like that, the voice faded, not defeated, but unmasked. The real temptation had never been the jump. It was the desire to turn obedience into spectacle and trust into demand. I approached the temple's edge with every grain of sand beneath my feet aching in solidarity. The wind hushed, as though creation itself held its breath. My heart hammered, not from fear of falling, but from the gravity of what stood before me. My own flesh, whispering lies of grandeur and desperation. My breath shortened, not from exertion, but from the silent war raging inside. The enemy wasn't outside me. It was the echo of a voice that sounded like mine, promising power, promising recognition, promising flight. Yet even in its sweetness, I could taste the void underneath. A single step forward could become a spectacle etched in his scrolls and sung by angels. But a step backward would seal my soul in obedience, silent, invisible, and eternal. Each breath was a battlefield, not of flesh against spirit, but of spirit demanding to be seen and spirit willing to remain unseen. I heard it again, soft, subtle, seductive. Jump and let the skies marvel at you. A temptation not of violence, but of validation. And I stood in that moment knowing that the most dangerous deceptions are not the ones that say, break the law, but the ones that say, shine, so they see you. I wrestled not with disobedience, but with desire. The desire to be seen, the desire to be celebrated. My flesh rose in me like a tide, urging me. Just a leap. Let the stones and wind conspire to catch you. Prove to the sky that you belong in its heights. The words were seductive, soft as silk, but beneath them lay the sharp edge of emptiness, for proof is never enough. If I leapt today, I would leap again tomorrow, and again, until my worth was nothing more than a performance measured by gasps and applause. That is the trap, the hunger for miracles on demand, the thirst for attention disguised as purpose. If the one who sent me did not require a leap, why should I offer one to win the hearts of men or tempt the silence of heaven? I knew then the enemy wasn't asking for rebellion. He was asking for recognition. I lowered my gaze to the ground I had already trod, the dust that bore my footprints and my prayers. I remembered the hands of those I had healed, the tear-streaked faces I had wiped, the children who had laughed at my touch. I saw every palm pressed together in hope, every brow that had sought my blessing. They had not needed spectacle. They had needed presence. They had not demanded proof. They had hungered for compassion. And I had been enough, not because I dazzled, but because I stayed, because I touched, because I loved. That was my mission, not to dominate the heights, but to kneel in the valleys. Not to impress, but to transform. And in their stories, in their pain, in their laughter, I saw a different kind of miracle. And then, from the very core of my being, I breathed. I am enough, not for heaven's chorus, not for earth's applause, but for the one whose voice first named me beloved. In that word, enough, I found a fortress. I found the quiet resistance that defied the need to perform. I found the courage to be unseen. I found the strength to step away, not because I feared the leap, but because I trusted the silence. And in that silence, I remembered the Father had not sent me to fall. He had sent me to stand. And so I did. My back turned to the cliff, my face set toward the dust, toward the roads still waiting for my feet, toward the people still waiting for hope. And in that choice, I felt no weakness, only clarity. I stepped back, and the wind resumed its song. The sky remained silent, yet in my stillness, I discovered a resurrection of faith. True faith does not leap to be caught. True faith stands firm when nothing catches it. It does not demand proof, it rests in promise. The tempter vanished, not in defeat, but in silence, because silence is what he cannot endure. He feeds on noise, on show, on spectacle. But obedience? Obedience speaks too deeply for him to comprehend. It roots you where he cannot reach. And in that rootedness, I was stronger than I had ever been. The edge no longer beckoned. The need to prove no longer whispered. I was not empty. I was full of purpose, full of peace. I closed my eyes and felt the tingle of divine breath against my heart. It did not lift me, but it sustained me, an unseen hand cradling a trembling soul. My transformation was not a flight, but a rootedness, to be anchored in trust, not in triumph. To know that the Father's will was never for me to leap, but to remain. To love those who wouldn't see me. To forgive those who would never thank me. To suffer without spectacle. To die without defense. That is the miracle. When you can obey without reward, love without return, believe without signs. And in that moment, I understood the edge was never meant to be a launching point. It was meant to be a test of stillness. If your flesh ever begs you to leap for spectacle, remember this. Faith that soars on wings is fleeting, but faith that stands on the edge, unseen and uncelebrated, is unshakable. That kind of faith builds kingdoms no wind can topple. That kind of faith opens blind eyes not with thunder, but with tears. And that kind of faith is the foundation of every true calling. So, if you're standing on an edge today, between fear and trust, between silence and applause, choose the path where no one watches. Choose the dust over the display. Choose the whisper over the shout. Choose the voice over the noise. Subscribe, not for the applause of angels, but for the quiet courage to stand where no one sees you and still believe you are held. That day, I learned something no scroll had ever written, something that cannot be taught by words, only by war, a quiet war waged between desire and devotion. I learned that obedience is not proven by movement, but sometimes by stillness. That love is not always shown in miracles, but in moments when you could act and choose not to. The flesh wants glory. It craves validation. It longs to be rescued, not because it trusts, but because it fears being unseen. But faith, true faith, doesn't ask God to prove himself. It simply stays when proof doesn't come. And in that staying, I felt the truth rise within me. I don't need to be caught to know I'm held. I don't need the angels to descend to believe my Father is near. That day, I didn't fall, but something in me did. The need to be seen, the need to be spectacular, the need to be more than enough. And in its place, something deeper took root. The kind of trust that doesn't need applause to be real. This is what I offer you. Not the power to jump, but the strength to stay. Because sometimes the greatest miracle is the one no one sees. The miracle of a heart that stands on the edge and chooses not to test love, but to trust it. If this page found you at the edge of your own decision, if you've ever heard the voice of your own flesh, begging for a shortcut to worth, share this moment, not for numbers, but for the soul still standing in silence, waiting for a reason to stay. Let them know staying is sacred too. And if your spirit is still hungry, still searching for what's next, there's another page on the screen. Not just a video, but a whisper, a word, a wound waiting to speak. Click it, not to escape, but to endure, because the next word may be the one you didn't even know you needed.